Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Lizza with TELUS News. And for our Friday wrap up this week, we have one of our favorite guests, one of our favorite people, actually, Michael Luttig, former federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. The last time, Judge, you were on, we previewed your piece in the Atlantic. That piece was published with the title "The End of Rule of Law in America." The subheadline was "The 47th President Seems to Wish He Were King, and He's Willing to Destroy What Is Precious About This Country to Get What He Wants." Did not mince any words, Judge. Um, and we'll talk about this, but your in that piece, you analyze many of the cases that are running through the courts right now. And reading some of these opinions, I can't help but being reminded of reading your piece because some of them are tracking precisely some of the arguments that you laid out, especially on tariffs, which we'll deal with last. So anyway, Judge, thank you for doing this, and thank you for helping us understand all of the big legal issues over the last week.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be on with you again and on Substack again for my second time.
I tell you, this is going to be your future. You're going to get to love Substack. I want to take us back to Thursday, May 22nd. So we'll sort of do Thursday to Thursday, unless there's something that happened today that I just missed and we need to get to. But the one of the opinions, Judge, that like so many things these last 4 months that seems enormously important, but then everyone kind of moved on and forgot about it, was something on the Supreme Court's emergency docket, a case called Trump versus Wilcox. It looks like it was decided 6-3, and there was a fiery dissent signed by Justice Kagan, I believe. So can you just unpack what's going on there? What the emergency docket is? How big a deal this case is?
Yes, Ryan, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to the court's so-called emergency docket. Um, that's a misnomer, it communicates this. Uh, Over the past uh, 4 or 5 months, but over the past year plus, increasingly the Supreme Court has accepted emergency petitions and substantively disposed of those emergency petitions. By substantively, I mean that without any question whatsoever, the court has telegraphed its view of the case on the merits.
Without it being briefed or any papers, the full briefs filed by both sides and all that.
There's literally no briefing whatsoever, of course, no argument, and very little presentation other than the opinion from the court below upon which emergency action is sought. That emergency action that is sought typically is a stay of the lower court decision or the lifting of a stay that was imposed by the lower court. Uh, and but not to get ahead of ourselves, but in my view, the Supreme Court should not have taken for emergency disposition a single one of the cases that it has since the beginning of Donald Trump's second term in office. And in other words, there has not been an emergency that would warrant the Supreme Court taking the case. The Supreme Court, in taking these cases that it has, is accommodating Donald Trump in a way that it would never accommodate any other person or litigant. And in so doing, uh, it has tragically begun to shape the most fundamental issues in our republic by these one or two paragraph orders like in Wilcox. Okay, so in Wilcox, and by the way, the the largest initiative of this president, whether he knows it or not, and he of course doesn't, is the so-called unitary executive theory of constitutional law. That is simply this: that the president of the United States controls all officers and officials who perform executive functions in the federal government. Now, the rub comes in here. Uh, Over the past 50 to 70 years, independent agencies and departments have developed in our federal government, like, for instance, the Federal Reserve Board. So the Supreme Court had decided, I think 35, 50, so a long time ago, in a case called Humphrey's Executor, that the heads and members of these executive departments and agencies could not be removed by the president except for cause. So this
And it is
president,
1935. I
yeah,
pulled up the opinion. Go ahead.
yes, that's right, 1935. So that's why uh, this president would like for the Supreme Court to overturn Humphrey's executor, giving him thereby authority and power over all executive branch officials who exercise executive functions. So that brings us to the Wilcox case.
Yeah.
It's only the first case to reach the Supreme Court on this theory, but the president removed the members and or the chairpersons of the NLRB and the Merit Systems Protection Board. Heretofore, those have been considered independent departments or agencies of the government. So that was
In other words, and just to clarify, because there's always some question of whether these agencies fall uh, under the Humphreys, but these two, there's really no question about that.
now there has not been any question until today.
Yeah, yeah,
You
they were
know,
clearly under independent agencies as under Humphreys.
yes. Your viewers wouldn't know this, but I'm considered a very conservative judge and lawyer, and all my professional career, uh, the conservative movement has been discussing the unitary executive theory, and so for the most part, I agree with the unitary executive theory. So just so you know, in the interest of full disclosure, as they say.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's no question at all that the law up to today literally, is that the president cannot remove those members from except for cause. Now, the
Right.
other big ticket executive department or agency is the Federal Reserve, and I'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, because they did
So,
something very unusual that I hope you can help us understand.
yeah, well, it's easy to understand. It's so in this short order of the Supreme Court on its emergency docket, the Supreme Court, in effect, gave the president the power to immediately remove the officers of the Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board. Okay, uh, it did so by staying the lower court's decision that had blocked the president from removing them. Uh, in the course of that, just one page essentially opinion, the court said that again, not to get too technical, the court didn't decide even the merits of those removals. Okay,
Yeah.
but because it came up in a stay posture, the Supreme Court said that Donald Trump is likely to prevail in his claim that these officials are executive officials removable by the president
Let me
with or
read it,
without
Judge.
cause.
Judge, I'm going to read it so it would be easier for you to respond to, and people who are watching this can get a sense of what we're talking about. This is from the first page here. The stay reflects our judgment that the government is likely to show that both the NLRB and MSPB, that's the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Systems Protection Board, exercise considerable executive power, but we do not ultimately decide in this posture whether the NLRB or MSPB falls within such a recognized exception. That question is better left for resolution after full briefing and argument. The stay also reflects our judgment that the government faces greater risk of harm from an order allowing a removed officer to continue exercising the executive power than a wrongfully removed officer faces from being unable to perform her statutory duty.
I was
So
trying to avoid you're reading that to your audience.
I know it's
So
it's
let
it's
me let me
dense.
put let me put that in English for your audience. The Supreme Court, for all intents and purposes, held that the president may remove the officers of the Merit Systems Protection Board and the NLRB by saying that when the case is heard on the merits, the president is likely to prevail. Okay, so that's the technicalities, but the world can assume that the Supreme Court will say eventually that the president can remove these people from office.
So the dissent, which everyone loves reading dissents because you judges just let it rip in your dissents.
Hmm.
And the Kagan dissent is really fiery here. And Humphreys is never mentioned in the order, but of course she mentions it in the dissent. And she essentially says that the Supreme Court just overturned Humphreys on the emergency docket in a 1.5, 2-page order, and has basically, shown their hand that when this is fully briefed and comes to the court, they are going to overturn it. Um, what do you? I mean, is she right? Is the dissent saying the truth here that this is essentially overturning this 1935 precedent?
Yes, that is correct for the reasons that you and I have been talking about. Because, first off, this is a huge decision, even in its preliminary form.
Right,
And
right.
in order to have issued that one-page order, the Supreme Court did overrule Humphrey, assume that it would overrule Humphrey's executor. And so, for we lawyers, Ryan, there's just nothing much to this other than that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So the dissent, I didn't even look at it. It doesn't matter, but it does suggest very strongly that Justice Kagan and the colleagues who joined her will dissent eventually from the final decision of the Supreme Court. But I
Yeah.
think what we want to do is move quickly to the only other thing that matters, which is truly huge, and that is, notwithstanding that this issue was not before the court at all, and the court would never typically address it. In this preliminary order, the Supreme Court went on to say, look, the Federal Reserve and the Open Market Committee they're totally different, i.e., saying to the world, we will never overrule Humphrey's executor, uh, and allow the president to control the Federal Reserve Board and the Open Market Committee.
A point
So
that you
we don't.
made the last time we talked, you said the Supreme Court would never allow that, and in this emergency order, they went out of their way to add a paragraph saying just that.
Yes, yes, Ryan. Thank you. I don't get immense credit for that, uh, but I'm pleased with the fact that the Supreme Court did say that.
I mean, just a final point on this. Look, one, just I'm glad we're talking about this because it's such a. I mean, it's if this were a fully briefed case and opinion, I think this would be getting more attention. But they using the emergency docket to overturn a really important precedent just seems like a big deal. But on this carve out, though, this is something that Kagan had a lot of fun with. She said, "Oh, I'm paraphrasing here. Then you guys just decided to slip in the fact that the Federal Reserve is exempt from this rule." She was basically saying with very little basis. Like, what is the basis that the Federal Reserve gets this special uh, carve out? What is going on there?
It's what Justice Kagan is saying there is that the Supreme Court's just making this up out of whole cloth and picking and choosing those departments and agencies that they want to be controlled by the president and those that they do not. If I had taken the position in this case that Justice Kagan did, I would have written a dissent that would make hers look like a concurrence, and it would have been written in the style of Justice Scalia had he also disagreed with the decision this week. But again,
And your main disagreement with this judge is using the emergency docket for this purpose, or for handing this new power to the president at all.
no, I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
But it's solely with using the shadow docket emergency in order to decide. And you're absolutely correct. They did overrule Humphrey's executor to allow the president to remove these officers now, and it's an abomination for the Supreme Court to render really what is in effect a landmark constitutional decision of great magnitude with no briefing, no argument, and in a one page, in just a few sentences.
Final thing on this: how would you carry, and of all the executive powers that Trump has accrued through asserting them or through the benefit of litigation, where does this decision stack up? I mean, how much more powerful does this make the president and any future president?
Well, let me first just address this single question, which I've tacitly addressed already, which is this is, well, when I said that whether he knows it or not, he has staked much of his presidency on the unitary executive theory.
Yeah.
And so, in the abstract, that is, in the abstract, as compared to all of the other assertions of executive power that he will lose, that this is significant for the presidency and significant for Donald Trump.
All right, that's a big one. Let's talk about Harvard, Judge. And I don't know. The biggest news was really the TRO last Friday that was immediately put in place after Harvard sued, after Trump tried to disqualify every 25% of the Harvard student body through all the foreign students, which amounts to 25%. There was immediately a restraining order put in effect, and that litigation continues. Um, what do you make of where the merits of this case and where you see it going?
Well, as I said in the Atlantic article and explained, uh, every single one of the president's signature initiatives is either unconstitutional or otherwise in violation of the law. Um, and
This one hadn't
it's
happened by the time, and this one hadn't happened yet when you were writing, right?
no,
Yeah.
and very few of them had happened, and I wasn't speaking, for temporarily. I was rendering a legal opinion on the final merits of each one of these when I said what I did, and I and I've been vindicated for whatever that's worth every day since that article ran. But that's neither here nor there. It's really, again, I don't get any credit for it because everything the president's done in this first 4 months now is just palpably unconstitutional or in violation of the laws. So as soon as I said that, let me explain then what I meant and what is still the case as to the Wilcox decision. As of today, still, it is illegal for the president to it is illegal under the Supreme Court precedent and under federal statute for the president to remove the members of the Merit Systems Protection Board and the NLRB. All the Supreme Court did was stay the lower court decision that said that in order to allow the president to remove those officers, saying that it is likely that the Supreme Court will allow him to do that in the future. My only point, Ryan, is that there's no one at all in this country who today would say that it is legal and constitutional for the president to remove these officers. They would just
Got it.
make the legal point that the Supreme Court did not decide the issue on the merits and they will decide it in the future. Okay, so
Yeah.
back
Got it. Got it. That's an
to
important point.
back to my main point uh, that all of these initiatives are unconstitutional or otherwise in violation of the laws. Otherwise, in violation of the laws just means that if they're not in violation of the Constitution itself, they're in violation of federal statute, i.e., in the case of the removal of these officials, uh, statute provides it can only be removed for cause. Okay, so that's a long-winded way of getting to the Harvard case. Everything that the president has done and said by executive order and otherwise is unconstitutional or otherwise illegal. Okay, uh, but the unconstitutionalities and the violations of law vary with the particular action that he's taken. But the largest aspect of the Harvard case and scores of other cases around the country is that the president, in quote, withholding funding from the colleges and universities and the other public institutions is in violation of the Constitution and federal statute, both, which which authorize only the Congress of the United States to appropriate funds. So the Impoundment Act, again, not to get too much in the weeds, would allow the president to quote impound or withhold very limited funds under very limited circumstances for a very limited amount of time. Instead, this president has purported to deny that funding to these entities forever. He cannot
Yeah.
do that. Harvard will win this case. There's no question whatsoever. And then, of course, when Harvard first refused to to bow before Donald Trump, the next thing he said is that I'll withdraw your tax exempt status under Section 501c3. Well, not only does the president have no authority to do that, when he said that, Ryan, he was in violation of a federal statute that specifically prevents the president of the United States from even suggesting an IRS audit for purposes of exempting of rescinding the exemption from any organization. That statute, as I pointed out in the Atlantic article, is punishable by a fine and imprisonment. Ryan, and it goes on with, but the bottom line, really, on the president's attack on Harvard, like these other institutions, is the president of the United States is purporting to require Harvard University and law schools and all these other schools to change their academic curriculum and change their governance.
Yeah.
The president of the United States, I mean, I don't even know what to say anymore, Ryan, except that the president of the United States has no power or authority whatsoever to have done this. None.
I
But
mean,
I want to
it's
add
just,
to your
yeah,
audience that Donald Trump knows all this and he doesn't care. Why? Because by the time that these cases get through the federal courts, he will have destroyed the individuals, the organizations, or the institutions, like Harvard.
yeah. I mean, the Harvard thing is just mind-boggling. Whatever you think of any institution like Harvard is going to have some major things all of us disagree with. An institution that's that old and that wealthy and that diverse. And I could go, I'm sure each of us has different things that we might agree with in the general kind of critique of some of the things that have been in the news the last few years. But the absolute taking a blowtorch to a crown jewel of education that is the envy of the world. And one of the things, it's probably one of the top 100, if not top 20 things that people outside of America, if you ask them what's, a great institution or thing about the United States, Harvard's on that list. It is this, there's a reason people from all over the world want to go there. And I just find it mind boggling that no one else in the Republican Party will realize that will speak up about this. You don't have to agree with this. I probably shouldn't say this, but it reminds me, frankly, of when the Taliban destroyed the statues of Buddha in 2001. I mean, they just decided to tear down one of these one of the great works of the ancient world. And I'm not comparing Trump to the Taliban, but the instinct to want to um, just to throw the baby out with the bathwater and to use important issues like anti-Semitism or some of the other culture war issues that they have a disagreement with at Harvard, to use that as a pretext to just knock the legs out from under this institution is mind-boggling. Um,
You used the right word. His reasons, asserted reasons, are all pretextual. Okay, but pretextual for his uh, uh, what are unquestionably nothing more than acts of revenge and retribution for uh, anyone and anything that he hasn't liked during the course of his lifetime. I saw an article in the New York Times, I believe, with a title that said something to the effect that that Donald Trump is really attacking knowledge itself.
Yes.
And I did
Yeah.
not have time to read that, but there's no
You
question.
and you don't yeah, you barely need to read beyond the headline to immediately get what the author was talking about.
That's right.
What and it's happening at HHS. It's happening with Doge, and it's happening with this assault on these universities. And I don't know if even Trump understands that. He just hates Harvard for all sorts of weird reasons.
Well, no,
And
I think it's more than that, Ryan. That's to give him too much credit. Um, you know, and look, I'll put this in context in my own life. As you know, I grew up in a small town in Texas. A country boy kind of thing. And in my particular town, which was wonderful in every respect, um, you know, it was not a it was not a place uh, that put a premium on learning and education about the world and critical thinking. Okay, and I hasten to add again, it was a wonderful place, and it was very natural and very normal. But that's to say this. It was not until I left that small town and went to college that I came to understand what education and knowledge is all about, and how not just important it is central and integral to life itself.
yeah,
Well, Donald Trump, we can stipulate, is not a person who would ever say what I just said.
yeah, yeah. And like so many of these issues, it would be different if there were one or two prominent elected Republicans who would speak out against it. I think the reason a lot of the comments are why aren't we hearing more about this? Why don't people talk more about this? And I think the way that the press works, unfortunately, unless some of his own party members join the criticism, everything just gets turned into a partisan issue. And it's been 10 years now. I shouldn't be shocked, but I continue to be just um I guess I just don't quite understand. I know these guys need to get reelected, but I don't understand how they don't think about their own legacies and the sort of period in history we're going through and what people are going to think of some of these Republicans in Congress, especially, but even governors and other elected officials just being silent through every one of these, every one of these assaults on knowledge, on the First Amendment, on the law. Uh, you know, it's. I mean, I know you get asked this all the time because you come from the right, you come from the conservative world. Have you? I mean, how do you process that?
Well, I've spoken publicly about it for 4 years now, and in and I've put words to the thoughts that you and millions of Americans are have been grappling with, and the words are nothing less than these, and like words. Um, the Republican Party and almost every Republican official in the country has sold their soul to the devil. Uh, they literally have acted and so conducted themselves as if they had no morals, no convictions, no principles, no beliefs whatsoever, and especially none of those in America itself and in our past and our future. That it's as if they are vessels for the corruption of America that's occurred over the past few years.
Well, very well said. And history is going to judge them very, very harshly. All right, let's get back to the law judge. Some good news, in my view. Uh, Trump went 0 for 3 on these absurd executive orders targeting law firms. On Tuesday, the latest one was the EO against the firm Wilmer Hale. Uh, and what's left to say about this? I noticed something very interesting. I didn't realize this, but someone pointed out that none of these have been appealed yet. Most of these other cases, the administration is appealing. These, my understanding is they haven't been appealed, so maybe they realize that they've got, they just don't have an argument. But all three of these orders, I don't know if you've read all of the opinions word for word, but all three of them, you could tell these judges um, were writing almost for history. I mean, these are the kinds of opinions that are about first principles and, sort of basic separation of power issues and fundamental rights. These aren't, as technical as some of the opinions get. They're pretty basic. That this is an egregious, all three of them, that they're an egregious abuse of the power of the president that violates these firms' First Amendment rights and several other rights as well. Um, what's left to say about what the courts have done with these executive orders?
Well, as you know, but your audience doesn't. It was really these executive orders against the law firms that brought me back into the public space.
Yeah, well, actually, I'd forgotten about that. So just, yeah, remind everyone about that, please.
Well,
I'd love to hear more about that.
I never wrote or said anything publicly from the election until mid February to late February, whenever these executive orders came out. And at
Yeah.
that point, as you can imagine, my phone lit up, and my best friend said that I had no choice, and and I thought about it only for a short time and thought, when the president of the United States is corruptly attacking lawyers and law firms and individuals, I cannot sit by. I mean, I couldn't live with myself, to the point that you and I were making earlier about the public officials or Republican officials. And so I came back out. So there isn't much left to be said, but here's what's important to be said: the these executive orders were uh, corrupt, not just literally corrupt in the full sense of the definition of corruption and public corruption, but they were also constitutionally corrupt. By which I mean this, and the best example, and I used in the Atlantic, was a single paragraph from the Williams and Conley brief in the Perkins Coie case, where Williams and Conley said this executive order against Perkins Coie is unconstitutional under the First Amendment for this reason. It's unconstitutional under the First Amendment for this reason also. It's unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment for this reason and for this reason. It is unconstitutional under the Sixth Amendment for this reason and this reason, and ending saying that it is also in violation of the Constitution's separation of powers. This was like the most beautiful paragraph that I said had ever been written in American history to a court. Every single word and every single charge against the President of the United States was unquestionably correct. And Now, so what remains to be?
And
Oh,
the
well,
courts agreed with you on that.
absolutely. But again, there was never any doubt. I mean, it was only mildly frustrating to me at the time that people were debating whether.
I was gonna say, doesn't that drive you crazy sitting there? You're kind of a little, you're not doing much writing and public punditry on this stuff. Doesn't it drive you crazy when these executive orders first came out, the way that they're covered, the way that he puts something out like this and immediately just changes the terms of debate, where suddenly there are people who knew nothing about this but are Trump supporters and are suddenly popping up, making the case that this is, this is okay, and and then people who maybe should know better, people in the press, just initially at least covering it as Donald Trump signed an executive order, targeting law firms without the kind of meaty legal paragraph saying this is almost certainly unconstitutional. That really drove me crazy, and still does with a lot of the coverage, is that his ability to just throw a lot of shit against the wall and not and get it reported as if it's not quite normal, but that it's there's a chance it's kosher.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. Not so much anymore that Donald Trump does it, because we have come to expect it literally every day. Um, but uh, two aspects of it, did distress me, and that was um, the way that the press covered it. But the press had no, there was no other way to cover it, because there was no one else out there like me calling it what it was. That's the dynamic, if you will, Ryan, that brought me out to the public again to do what I had been doing, as you know, for the prior 4 years.
Yeah,
Now, at the personal level, and you know the story well, for these past 4 or 5 years, in some sense, I've been almost alone out there among Republicans and conservatives. And
absolutely. I can't think of another someone who served 15 years on the bench, was someone that the Bush White House considered for the Supreme Court, someone who Senator Ted Cruz, one of the most conservative members of the Senate, said would have been his choice if he were Bush. You've got the Federalist Society bona fides, I assume, and I can't think of another uh, person with your resume that has been as outspoken on these legal issues.
and 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 as a consequence, Ryan, again, as you know, I have felt a profound obligation to my country to do what I've done for the past 4 or 5 years, especially given that no one else was doing it. But that's just, again, a long winded way of saying that uh, it's not my job to have done any of this. It's the Republicans. And
Yeah.
not one person has done it. And the only handful who have tried never had a chance, because they were beaten back by Trump and his followers. So, but that's where we still are today, Ryan.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's honestly, it's getting worse in some ways rather than better in terms of the silence in the face of the ongoing corruption and abuse of power. And I have no problem as a journalist using those phrases. I don't consider them partisan in the least. I consider them just accurate adjectives about what we're witnessing. All right, Judge. I know you probably got better things to do on your Friday night than hang out on Substack Live with me, but I truly appreciate it. But let's talk about the decision, yesterday's decision on tariffs. Which, if people watching this haven't read your Atlantic view, you sort of did this legal analysis in the Atlantic. It's a wonky technical case. The opinion, it's not an easy read. Um, and if anyone hears in the background a puppy, that's my puppy doing some whining a little bit. So we do have to wrap up. Um, But tell us about the tariffs case, the significance of it, and I think importantly, what's going to, what the likely, what the alternative scenarios are here as it makes its way likely to the Supreme Court. Because I've seen some commentators I trust who, think that this decision, while sound, is not airtight in terms of what the Supreme Court might do.
Yeah. First, allow me just to make the point that for each of the issues I addressed in the Atlantic article, but especially this one, uh, I knew that I had to be right because this one was outside of the law per se and was a global initiative of the President of the United States of America. And when you tell me something like that, if I'm going to say that it's illegal, I have to tie that down every way possible so that there is no doubt in anyone's mind that what I'm saying is correct. And that's what I did for purposes of the article. Now, here's the issue. The president actually has undertaken most of these initiatives by invocation of emergency powers. Emergency powers that are not his as president, but rather emergency powers that have been delegated to him by the president, by the Congress of the United States. So it was with tariffs. Under the Constitution, it's the Congress of the United States that is empowered to tax and impose tariffs. Okay,
Right.
not the president, but the under what's called the Emergency Economic Powers Act or something. The Congress long ago delegated its power to the president in circumscribed circumstances, limited in by tariff amount, limited by scope, and limited by duration, to impose tariffs in an emergency situation. Now, what was the act contemplated was that it would be something akin to the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor. Without consulting Congress, the President of the United States could impose crippling tariffs on Japan. Okay.
Judge, keep
Uh,
talking. I'm just going to grab a puppy and bring him here.
yeah. And and fast forward to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, in his executive order or in his proclamation, I can't remember which it was, um, said that
I got
he
you.
was
I got you.
invoking the act, the
I got you. Okay.
IEPA, uh, on the basis of the emergency that existed by the trade deficits. Uh, well, that's laughable. Okay, we have trade deficits. We will always have trade deficits and trade, trade whatever benefit. This goes back and forth. Like a seesaw, and always will. There's no one in the world who thinks that that's an emergency. Okay, and that's what I said in the Atlantic article, and that's what the International Court held day before yesterday. Just it couldn't have been any clearer. Same rationale. Again, I get no credit whatsoever. It's just the basis on which the president asserted an emergency and imposed the tariffs is not even arguably an emergency. Now, for your
Now, having
audience,
said all that, oh, okay, good.
yeah, so for your audience who have read the news, last night they saw at the same time I did that the federal the federal court in what not the
Not the
federal
trade court,
circuit
but
the federal circuit in
yeah.
D.C. To which the appeals from the international court go had stayed the international court's decision.
Right. So the tariffs stay in effect, but that okay. So yeah. So what's the relevance of that?
That's only, it's only so that that court can get briefing and consider the issue. There's
Got it.
not a chance in this world that that court will overrule the international court. That leaves
And
the
right.
Supreme Court of the United States, and
Got it.
you've heard, and I'm sure some people have said the Supreme Court uh, will reverse. I don't believe there's any chance in the world that this court will reverse that.
You don't. You think so? You
No,
think? Yeah.
I
You
really
have more
don't.
faith in, sometimes I think you have, look, you were right about the Federal Reserve for sure, but you think they'll come down where the trade court did.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's just, you know, the only opinion of the Supreme Court in recent memory that uh, that was had no basis whatsoever in the Constitution or the laws or the history or the founding was the decision in Trump versus United States, where the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump absolute immunity to violate the Constitution and the laws of the United States. But this ain't that. Now, I believe me, I'm the kind of person who would say in conversation with you privately that this Supreme Court will probably hold or could hold that this is the quintessential emergency contemplated under the IEPPA and affirm the tariffs. But I really don't believe that's possible.
All right. Well, that's a hopeful note to end on. Um, we're coming up on 5 o'clock, and I got to go take this little guy out before he does his business on my lap. And if people are wondering why I've been posting a little less the last week, this is why. We'll get him trained and back into a more of a closer to a daily schedule, and then I'll be bugging Judge. I'll be bugging you a lot more to do these conversations. I don't know if you're reading the comments, but the comments have been overwhelmingly positive, and people love these conversations. So please come back.
Well, thanks,
You never
Ryan.
disappoint.
As you know, I don't even yet know how to log on to this podcast, so I much
No,
less
you
look
did
at the
fine.
comments. But I do sincerely appreciate the comments. So have a good afternoon and a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Judge. Have a great weekend. I appreciate it so much. Take care, everyone.